Welcome to Solved, the political discussion show for people with attention spans and those looking to develop one. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers are Amanda, Deon, and Erin, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
How's it going?
Collectively, we produce the venerable, indispensable, not to mention award-winning podcast Best of Left, where humans, that's us, curate progressive media on a chosen topic, creating episodes that are greater than the sum of their parts. On this show, we use those same curation skills to pull together stories and ideas that help us solve some of society's biggest problems. Because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. Today, we're discussing how the great can fall. And it usually happens, according to the classic quote, slowly at first, then all at once. And sometimes it can happen due to a failure to act, like a failure to evolve with changing times. But when it comes to scientific inquiry and the people and places that do the hard, mostly thankless work of pursuing new knowledge for the sake of it, the fall of these places actually don't tend to be caused by inaction, but rather deliberate choices. When someone decides to silence those who follow truth where it leads rather than follow any ideology or dictates prescribed by political leaders, the science doesn't just suffer because the scientists aren't able to do their work. The scientists also simply leave. And this is what's called a brain drain. It happened in the Soviet Union, it happened in Nazi Germany, and now it's happening in Donald Trump's America. But to ease us into today's discussion of downfalls into irrelevance, we start with this article that took the most serious and far-sighted angle that I came across on this widely reported story. AOL dial-up ending reminds us that all empires collapse eventually. I think that, let's say, Kotaku article, I think definitely my favorite headline of the week. Erin, as our representative of the youth on this show, did you get to experience the thrills and suspense of dial-up internet?
I'm not that young. Like, yes, absolutely.
It's all relative.
Not only that.
It's relative.
Not only that, we got
know the
our
cutoff.
subscription from the cereal box back when they put the CDs. And
Okay.
yeah, see, this was nostalgic for me too.
Yeah, see, I mean, I was on the leading edge of AOL. Like, I had become like a fully conscious child when AOL came on the scene. And I don't know how long it was until the last child didn't have that experience. Was it, 10 years or 15 years? I just don't know. There, I feel like the You've Got Mail sound effect was kind of the first real computer slot machine for the masses that paved the way for the infinite scroll casino. It's that hit of dopamine you would get when you hear that there was mail and the anticipation of finding out if it was something useful or garbage. It was like the literal same effect as wondering if the next post in your feed will be like a rare diamond or just more of the rough, and the next one and the next one and the next one. I feel like that was the first time I had that experience.
Back when
from
you
a
went on the
computer.
internet once a day, which is
Yeah.
Right.
really hard to believe. And oof.
Yeah. So the details of this article are not that interesting. It's just talking about how AOL went from the absolute Goliath that seemed set to take over the entire internet to being like a weird sidelined bit player that is, I don't know if they are still related to Time Warner. They probably sold that off at some point. They're now related to Yahoo, and like all of those old tech companies are just like aggregators and somehow still have money in the bank. But the real reason I bring up this article is, besides the headline, the last line is, it turns out even the biggest businesses can crater. If you live long enough, you too can outlive corporate gods as they topple into the abyss.
Yeah.
I mean, but before you celebrate, I thought if you just replace businesses and corporate gods with nation states and scientific supremacy, you've got a pretty good description of today's topic, which is like less exciting than corporate entities getting their comeuppance. So that brings us to our first real article of the day. This from The Atlantic. Every scientific empire comes to an end. And I'm going to tell the story of this piece. Like, usually I would pull quotes and sort of skip past the personal story, but I actually really like the personal story in this one. So it starts with the story of a Soviet scientist, Rold Sagdev. Apologies for obviously mispronouncing that. And he started his work as a scientist in Moscow in 1955. And as you might imagine, science had a pretty hard time under the Soviet Union. For instance, it says, quote, when Joseph Stalin took power, he funded some research generously, but insisted that it conform to his ideology. Sagdev said that his school books described Stalin as the father of all fields of knowledge and credited the Soviets with every technological invention that had ever been invented. And to which I say, like, give Trump another couple of years, and that sounds like it could be what
Months.
he's striving for.
Yeah.
Oh, months. Yeah, fair.
Mm-hmm.
So Sagdev ended up the head of the Soviet Space Research Institute, but found himself surrounded by party yes men, not people with actual scientific knowledge, which also sounds very familiar. The article gives other examples of how this pattern continued, and eventually he did give up on the Soviet science entirely and moved to the United States, where he appreciated the funding for science being abundant and being like actually appreciated by all sides of the political aisle here. So that's where it starts. It'll also end with a bit from him as well. But in the middle of the article, it also touches on Nazi Germany. It says, quote, it was Adolf Hitler who possessed the greatest talent for scientific self-harm. Germany had been a great scientific power going back to the late 19th century. But when the Nazis took over in 1933, Hitler purged Germany's universities of Jewish professors and others who opposed his rule. Many scientists were murdered, others fled the country. Quite a few settled in America. In a very short time, the center of gravity for science just up and moved across the Atlantic Ocean. And like that's how quickly it can happen as described there. And I think that's the key of what needs to be understood, is that science as a whole and the actual logistics of science, how scientists do their work as humans, like who have lives, who need to live in a place, have families to take care of, those very human logistics can have major impacts on where science gets done. And so, you can imagine a world in which, a few years from now, Trump is out of office and we try to revert to caring about science again. But if a bunch of scientists have already moved away, they're probably not going to come back. And I mean, we'll have lots more to say about that, but that's kind of the major takeaway here.
Yeah. They were going through examples of how this has happened in history, and they talked about Spain and how detrimental their brain drain was. And this is back not even during Franco, this is back in the 17th century during the Spanish Inquisition. And just this line kind of caught me. In the 17th century, the Spanish made almost no contribution to the ongoing scientific revolution. And on its face, that may seem kind of nationalistic, like, oh, they didn't get a chance to be part of it. But what that means is less countries and entities with budgets who could have invested or, funded universities, even in the 17th century. Like, we didn't have everybody moving towards the goal of advancement. And so we all are negatively impacted by that. If any nation decides this isn't our priority, then we are not getting everybody together and moving ourselves forward. And so we lose. Everyone loses when even the country you don't live in decides this isn't a priority for us.
I found the bit about Hitler's ability to fumble scientific knowledge. Like, it's really ironic, honestly, because America benefited the most from post-World War II Nazi scientists. Like, look up Operation Paperclip. It's a real thing. But they benefited the public, like the science that was done because of all those minds that came over here. In a lot of ways, a lot of it was military benefit, but there was some real benefit. And I remember as a kid, really being into NASA. My uncle worked for NASA. I thought I was going to be an astronaut like a lot of kids did. And that's not even in the cards anymore, because now we have our own Nazis that are determined to do the same thing that Hitler did and push up a bunch of people out because they're not the right skin color, they're not the right nationality, and we're determined to privatize everything. And especially when it comes to space exploration, we've almost entirely privatized it to SpaceX. Blue Origin's coming up, but again, privatized. And, Elon is a Nazi. So now we're privatizing the Nazi scientific research. We have given up the benefits of the post World War II win, and we are going the way of the Soviet Union. Like it's really weird how we're just doing such a strange repeat of all the bad mistakes that were done by every country up to World War II.
Yeah, it's not like we didn't know.
Well, it depends on who you mean when you say it's not like we didn't know. I mean, there's that story of Trump going to the World War II cemetery in France and having to ask, now, like, remind me which side was the good guys? He
Forgotten about
he doesn't
that.
know. He doesn't know about historical mistakes, obviously.
That's true. But also, even if you don't understand history, which apparently they don't, it surprises me that these Trump cultists, like the diehards, the ones that work in the administration, can't see that they live pretty good lives right now, and that is because of America's standing in the world in relation to advancement in medicine and scientific research. Like, that does kind of surprise me. And I know they're not smart, and I know they just want control and power, but to have fellow Americans, like people who grew up, in different stages of overlapping the same period that we did, where we have made dramatic advancements in science and technology, and we are absolutely the leaders, whether that's just because we have more money or not, could certainly be evaluated, but we are. They always say, we're the best, America's the best. Without that, without the scientific research and medical research advancement, that's like the only thing we're the best at. Like, they keep saying we're the best. Well, we don't give anybody healthcare, and we don't help people that are homeless, and we don't give childcare to anybody, and we don't really defend our social services and fund them. So what are we the best at? This was the only argument for that for a very long time that actually held up. And so, okay, you want to get rid of the only thing that actually makes us stand apart as quote unquote the best? I still have a tough time wrapping my head around that.
You are thinking of it in terms of they actually think their lives are good. They, I would think, argue that their lives are not good because there are foreigners here, because there are black people here, because white people, white men, white straight men specifically, aren't in charge of everything. And that is why their life isn't good, and they need to make it better.
But to cut funding for research and science doesn't necessarily get
You're thinking
it doesn't
logically.
fix their racism.
You're doing logic.
I mean, I guess I don't know. I'm pretty, like, I guess what I'm getting at is I think this is where the fascism is really bold and blatant, and it is very obviously about controlling the masses and the minds. There is no veneer on this one because it does not contribute to their quote unquote goals at all. It actually counters them. And so it's the one area where I am kind of surprised that they can't, Trump claims he's going to invest in, or we're going to get a cut now of NVIDIA and whatever. Of course, he thinks personally he's getting a cut, it seems. But previous, even right-wing administrations have wrapped themselves in America's technological and research and scientific advancement. That's why this one stands out so much to me and just seems so much of the bald-face fascist line, because it does not actually fit with anything that they say.
I'm going to offer you the perspective of how this is being sold to the right wing. I know you know this, and I know most of our listeners do, but just as a reminder, this is often the argument that they place, like that we're doing a lot of frou-frou science. and they'll like point to studies that are so disconnected to how they could be applied. So, they'll talk about animals' migration patterns or,
Mhm.
something that it's, oh, we need to put this much money into that. How silly. That's what we're cutting. We're cutting waste so that we can really hone in and do the important science. So I would say it's all that curtain where all of us are looking at it. We know the trends, we understand where they target and why, but there's still the curtain that I think at least the Republican Party hides behind, which is no, we're getting to the root so that we can study the important things, not this like silly leftist, what gender is that animal, the quote
Yeah.
freak show of science,
Sh
if you will.
Absolutely. I mean, and I've definitely seen those talking points. Actually,
Yeah.
Jessica, I think it's Nurek, is how you say her name?
Mhm.
Dr. Jessica Nurek, who's a doctor of nutrition science. She's, got a lot of content online, and she's just so good at debunking all of the Maha crap and, like, somewhat compassionate as well. But yeah, one of the things she highlighted was in the 90s, NIH studied the Gila monster and why it was able to only eat a few times a year but still maintain its blood sugar. And they didn't know what they were going to find. That was just like, this is interesting. We probably will find out something, useful or interesting from this research. And NIH funded it. And then that research led to identifying a peptide. And then that research led to the GLP-1 drugs that are now for diabetes and making influencers skinny. And so, it seems like waste, or, if you present a certain way, but it's actually like exploratory science, which is what we desperately need in order to find innovations. And I just wanted to highlight that because I was going to bring it up later anyway. And that's such a good example of what they get on TV and say, we're looking at Gila Monster's blood sugar. What a waste of public
Yeah,
funds, when actually,
exactly.
like, it's a huge development in science and saved a lot of people's lives with diabetes.
Okay, so you've convinced me that science is good with that story. But the piece I'm missing is, how did we fund that research and Denmark got that drug? Denmark's the one producing Ozempic and getting all the billions and billions of dollars for it. We're getting cheated.
Mhm.
We need more tariffs.
It's
More tariffs.
There we go. There we
I
go.
was going to say it's almost as if we need to do more funding so that we can beat other nations with their development.
I was thinking
I don't know.
walls. Definitely more walls, more tariffs.
I mean,
So-
every $1 invested in NIH generates $2.56 in economic activity. So if that's your concern, there you go.
Yeah. Okay, so obviously lots of today's conversation is going to be pretty dark. Here's the positive angle that I'm going to be hanging on to throughout. So from this article, it says, if the US is no longer the world's techno-scientific superpower, it will almost certainly suffer for the change. That this isn't the positive part yet. Then it says, America's technology sector might lose its creativity, but science itself, in the global sense, will be fine. The deep human curiosities that drive it do not belong to any nation state. An American abdication will only hurt America. And so the positive view I'm trying to take is sort of appreciating the flexibility of humanity as a whole. And this actually fits into a metaphor that I got from my brother many, many years ago. And it's like a coping strategy that he has for dealing with the sadness of the world, to be frank, is that he thinks of humanity as like a natural force, like a hurricane or tornado that does damage, but has no consciousness. And obviously, individual humans are very conscious and in control of their actions, but collectively, we're much more akin to a sort of natural force that, rather than acting based on our reason and rationality, acts based on like stimuli and inputs, the way, a hurricane can develop from inputs from the natural world, right? And so anti-intellectualism is a naturally occurring force in human nature and society, and it can ebb and flow, but you can kind of imagine that as being a natural force. And so, as we talk about how science itself and scientists doing work are being affected by the changes, like the political changes and the rise of anti intellectualism and the drive of fascism to squash countervailing ideas to their ideology, scientists, like, I start to see them as a slowly moving nomadic tribe that must uproot and move to where conditions are more favorable. It's like, oh, is there an ice age coming? Better move south. Like, it's kind of that. 80 years ago, oh boy, we got to get out of Europe. Let's go to the US. Things look more favorable there. And actually, this is the end of this article, getting back to Sagdev, the Soviet scientist, after moving to the US in 1990. It says, American science is what ultimately won Sagdev over to his new home. He was awestruck by the ambition of the US research agenda, and he liked that it was backed by real money. He appreciated that scientists could move freely between institutions and didn't have to grovel before party leaders to get funding. But when I last spoke to Sagdev on July 4th, he was feeling melancholy about the state of American science. Once again, he was watching a great scientific power in decline. He has read about the proposed funding cuts in the newspaper. He has heard about a group of researchers who are planning to leave the country. Sagdev is 92 years old and has no plans to join them, but as an American, it pains him to see them go. End quote. And I gotta say, like, I had a more emotional reaction to the end of that story than I ever would have expected.
I definitely was more thinking of things like you, Jay, where like I'm not over patriotic, and it does make me a little sad that America's made this turn only because like it's fascism and we're living through it. And unfortunately, most of us I don't think have the option to flee and or have family here that keep us connected. But in thinking about that, like maybe it's a good thing that America doesn't gatekeep science right now. And I mean, like, there's always going to be some level of gatekeeping. And I think the ambition of science, like, it was wavering before we got to this point. This is just so blatantly obvious that we're at that tipping point. But I do think maybe handing the reins over to some other countries and, yeah, I guess distilling access, allowing them to gatekeep a little bit versus the United States. But in talking about access, like we have to acknowledge that there was a benefit to Americans to have such research here.
Mhm.
And now that it's going to be elsewhere, there is only going to be select few Americans that can get, access to that level of education, to that level of grant money to be able to research in those ways.
I mean, that's the difficult part about this. Like, the positive note is that science will be good and humanity will probably be better off for it. The short term, we're all gonna suffer for this. Like, it's gonna be a hard time here.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many people are really understanding what's happening. Like, we are watching our own Soviet Union collapse. We're watching like kind of a balkanization of the United States, where Texas is doing its own thing, where California is
Mhm.
doing its own thing, where they're just a loose collection, and the United is way out of the picture of the naming of this country. And that's gonna make everything harder. And I do think probably like the net effect on the world that America has had over the last 50 years is probably net negative. So maybe it is time to let this empire die, because empires just in general are bad. Like, what Jay is talking about reminds me of, it's the Star Trek future. The next stage of this is that we stop thinking of ourselves as American citizens. We stop thinking of ourselves as Chinese citizens. We stop thinking of ourselves as X country citizens and start thinking of ourselves as humanity and working together. Once scientists don't have to move to a different place to do the science and can collaborate all over the globe, I do think that's the next leap forward for humanity, if we can get there. But
Yeah.
in the meantime, we do have to prepare for the worst.
Also, the reality is we had the big money for a long time. And yes, other countries are doing excellent research, but they don't have the kind of funds that we were pumping into this research for decades. And so, no matter what, even if other countries increase their spending and research, we're never going to make up what was lost here. We are going to collectively be behind for a very long time unless something, dramatic takes place or changes. And so We're plunging ourselves back in time, really, when it comes to advancements and knowledge and understanding even of our universe and ourselves. I mean, it's not a pretty picture, and it's sad. It is a deeply sad state.
On a little more positive note, I can't remember the video I watched because, we do so much research, but I was watching a climate scientist that was at a climate science symposium or whatever, and he was talking about how America's getting left behind, and there weren't nearly as many people representing America there as there were. China was there, European Union, but
Mhm.
also the Gulf states. Like the Gulf states are really, in his estimation, investing in future climate change technology at a much higher rate than anyone would, just
Yeah.
expect, just
Yeah.
thinking where they get all their money. But if that's the way forward, we will accidentally benefit from that, because if the rest of the world has decided that we have to do something about climate change, that'll be good for everybody, even us, despite ourselves.
Isn't it so like America, though, to be like, we're not going to fund this anymore, but
Yeah.
absolutely we want the benefits of
Yeah.
whatever you discover? Yeah, absolutely. But let's also keep in mind that's going to come with a different price tag than if it
Absolutely.
were, discovered or researched here.
Oh boy. So that's sort of the overview, but we're going to dive into more of the specifics, which brings us to this article from 2018, I think, AmericanLaboratory.com. A scientist sort of pondered the connection between nationalism and being anti science. The headline is What's Behind the Rejection of Science? And they were sort of like expressing this consternation. Keeping in mind, he's just talking about like the first couple of years of the first Trump administration, and he's already worried about the anti science bend. And so a colleague suggested that he read Jason Stanley's book, How Fascism Works, and he got some clarity from that. So, he actually wondered the same thing I did about Germany. Like before I read everything I needed to read for this discussion, I thought, well, but Germany was out there, they were inventing V2 rockets, and their scientists were brought to the US and helped build our space program. So I genuinely thought of Nazi Germany as relatively pro science, but that is only the case in very specific circumstances. So the article says, quote, Stanley notes several obstacles along the way to creating a fascist state. These include lawyers, government, press, and intellectuals, including scientists. Each is a potential threat that can be marginalized. And why scientists are a threat to egocentric leaders. And obviously, this goes for Hitler and everything on down, as we already heard explained about banning Jewish scientists and all of that. But just in a general anti-intellectual sense, he says, quote, scientists are adept at evaluating hypotheses. It is unlikely that scientists as a group can be counted on to blindly toe a party line. Individuals and academic leaders especially enjoy a certain prestige based on their position as thought leaders. This competes for attention with the egotist. Plus, scientists are the primary source of inconvenient truths such as global warming. Since scientists and science cannot be counted as supporters, the emerging leader will see science, including staff and work product, as non-supporters and seek to marginalize our influence. End quote. So in a nutshell, that sums it up real quick.
I love the use of the word egotist, because that's really that's fascism in a nutshell, right? It's just a giant group
Mhm.
of egomaniacs trying to satisfy
Yeah.
their egos about how great they are personally, and they funnel that into the homeland, Deutschland, America, whatever it is, because that has to be the best. Obviously, I'm from here. How can it not be the best?
Yeah.
Science often will counteract that and say, maybe we're not the best at that. Researchers who, like Amanda was asking, what are we really the best at? A lot of people who do research say that maybe America isn't the best at anything really right now. And that's go counter to everything that they're trying to say. As opposed to doing the hard work of making ourselves better, we'll just lie about it better. And that's Trump in a nutshell.
Yeah. And I thought that was very clarifying as well. Like the primary source of inconvenient truths
Yeah.
comes from scientists. And of course, depending on well, in this situation, depending on what Trump decides today is his favorite business CEO, whoever gave him a gift, whatever, if there is science that says that, and there is science that says that asbestos is bad for you, well, we're just not going to listen to that, and we're going to make sure there's no regulation on asbestos. They did go back on that one because they got such intense public outcry, but he was about to just take all the regulations off of asbestos, like, because he felt like that industry was supporting him. I mean, that's it. So if you can cut down the amount of inconvenient truths or the source of any of the knowledge that might get in the way of you looking for your next lapdog, that works well.
So we've already touched on the concrete benefits of funding scientific research. AmericanProgress.org wrote an article solidifying some of that. It's titled Attacks on the U.S. Innovation Ecosystem Are an Attack on a Wellspring of American Prosperity. And just the big number, the overarching number, says that by one estimate, post-war federal research and development funding provided returns of 140% to 210%. And American firms have commercialized countless technologies, including the internet, smartphones, GPS, rechargeable lithium ion batteries, and breakthrough medicines, the creation of which was funded in part by federal investments in research and development. And so I only just had this thought. I mean, Trump is technically a businessman, not a great one, but I had the thought, shouldn't anyone who does business know that, you got to spend money to make money, you got to do the research to make the product or whatever. And then I remembered, oh, right, he's not that kind of businessman.
Yeah, he doesn't make anything.
He doesn't make anything. He makes himself look important and then sells that. That's what he sells. So there is no research and development. There is no investment that goes into anything Trump has ever done. And so even on that, run the government like a business sort of level, this is one of those things where people on the left would be like, yeah, run the country like a business in terms of investing in our future. And he can't even get that
He
one right.
has said that when you are spending money or paying someone, you are losing.
Yeah.
Any spending of money.
Which is why he doesn't
pay his vendors.
Doesn't pay his bills.
Right, doesn't pay his bills, doesn't pay his vendors. He thinks it's a loss. So the term investment doesn't even make any sense to him.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, that's rough. Yeah. So this article, I mean, the Center for American Progress, it's a, lefty think tank. They're, American do-gooders who want good things for America, which is fine. But they brought something up that reminds me of a point Erin made a few minutes ago. It says, to protect the country's edge in science and innovation, it is imperative that all institutions that benefit from the development of new technologies, new ideas, and new products stand up for federally funded research and oppose attacks on this ecosystem, end quote. And like Erin, I'm sort of two minds about this, where, the call to protect the country's lead in science and innovation, like, I get it, it's fine. And, I think Deon was the one who pointed out, like, there will be very serious direct health and quality of life impacts during this transition period. I'm not in favor of any of those things. I'm not in favor of anyone being anti-science, but looking way down the road, Europe has shown themselves to be ahead of us on the ethics and things like privacy concerns that arise around new technologies. And so if the center of gravity of science and innovation is shifted back to Europe, that may very well be a good thing in the long term.
I mean, I kind of agree because I'm currently doing an unfortunate amount of research on the Maha movement and specifically the report that they put out. But in doing that, I've been listening to terrible interviews so that all of our listeners don't have
listeners
to.
Of the Best of Left podcast, wherever you get your podcasts.
Of course. And one of them was with the FDA head, Marty Makary, maybe. And it was excruciating, because everything, under fascism is under the guise of, no, everything is going well here. So part of his explanation of the budget cuts, because obviously the interviewer's like, how can you guarantee the science is safe if you don't have the scientists? There's like these huge budget cuts. That's all administrative. So if anyone was worried that it was, actual scientists at any of these divisions, no, it's just administrative. They're making this streamlined. And just thinking about fascism and how science develops under it, one of the things I was thinking about is that they'll start with a problem, but because nothing can come down to systemic issues, nothing can examine race, access, or anything systemic that has happened. Everything has to like then be scapegoated elsewhere. So, part of what they're talking about is like ultra processed foods. Oh God, this is wreaking havoc on our children. But it was like interesting the way they talked about it is that taxpayers should have access to whatever the foods they want to have access to. But you know who shouldn't? People receiving federal
Yeah,
dollars on SNAP.
that's right. That's right.
And they'll talk around this issue as if the problem is the individuals and the choices they're making and like being allowed to buy junk food versus food deserts and actual systemic issues that limit access to fresh foods, to healthier foods. So, I mean, this is the state of science under fascism, and why I'm like, yes, I do think maybe it moving could be good, just because the science that they're going to uplift, the science that they're going to put in front of us, is most likely going to have huge gaps in it that they're not willing to like go down to root causes or anything on.
So I hear what you're all saying. I get it. I certainly agree. It's just it is painful because I think, going back to what are we the best at? One of the few things that I've still felt proud of is our research and science. And maybe
Yeah.
that's because I've witnessed it very closely as a rare disease patient and I've seen it evolve and seen like the people working behind the scenes to do things that help people and use science to get there. Look, there's a strong tie with, the capitalist mindset and science. Obviously, we have pharmaceutical companies, they're not do-gooders, and I lament that, but I also think the system itself has also produced incredible things that have changed lives and saved people's lives and made our quality of life in general for the better. And so I think the problem that I have with this, okay, maybe the silver lining is that Europe takes the lead, is again just that even if you take Europe collectively, I'm not sure that they can make up the difference in what we are going to lose over here by our scientific system and labs and entities, falling. I think it's hard to remember just how big we are and how this isn't a project that's just happened in the last 20 years. This is something that's been going on for closer to 100. We have invested and built and maintained and advanced not just the system itself, like the infrastructure itself is here. And for other countries to try to make up that difference, it is going to be extremely difficult. It's not that, again, it's not that there isn't amazing science being done in other places. It's just that we are so fucking big. And the vacuum that we will leave is going to be very, very difficult to make up in any way.
Well, fortunately, we've also been educating all these people from around the world, and they're taking the knowledge that they've gotten from us and taking it back home. They're going to have to rebuild the infrastructure. It's not going to be like, it's going to be bad for everybody. I think that's the takeaway. It's not going to be good short term. Long term, it might be better for everyone but us for a while. I do think we're in a cycle, and right now the cycle of this empire is ending, and it's not going to be happy. It's not going to be fun. Like our best case scenario was kind of like a England where it just kind of petered out and they lost all the stuff they stole except for the stuff they have in their museums, and there was no
Yeah, they
consequence,
kept that.
and there was no consequences for all the violence and murder they did around the world. They just kind of were losers now.
Petered out.
Yeah, and now, but they're doing to themselves what we're doing to ourselves and punishing themselves with tariffs against themselves, and that's just, I think, going to be our lot. It's tough to accept. I think that's the huge part of it. It's really tough to accept, and this might not fit here, but I really do feel like it kind of fits in a way. My daughter just started a new school, and it's a private school, and it's a lot more demanding. The first couple days she's had a hard time, and my wife is upset about her struggling, and I am too. But I think long term, it's going to be better for her. And she said, my phone is obviously listening to me because this just came up on my Instagram. So she sent me this. It says, healthy parenting means allowing children to struggle, to be frustrated, to make mistakes without being rescued. Instead of, I just want my child to be happy, we need, I want my child to be able to cope with everything life brings. And I think America has spent a lot of time just trying to be happy, just telling ourselves we're the best without actually making ourselves able to deal with struggle. And this Maha movement, the MAGA movement that has come in, is just about handing out treats and telling everybody everything's great. And in the meantime, not doing any of the things that will actually make things better in the long term, going through some struggle, going through some pain, and are going to cause more pain because of it. So that's my biggest problem with all of this, is just their inability to really look at what's wrong with America, what's good with America. They only want to say, this is good, this is great. We can't talk about any bad things. And that's when you end up with all this nonsense, this fascist takeover that's just about how great we are without actually doing the work.
Can I say, I think my takeaway from this whole thing is going to be fascism described as nonsense.
I mean, it's really kind of like
It
minimizing.
was cute. It was cute. This nonsense.
But it is. It's all nonsense.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. No one's the greatest.
Yeah. And when you talked about, how the word egotist from that article really nails it. I mean, that's all it is. That's why it's so fragile. The ego is fragile. Yeah. And so it's easy to poke. It's easy to get a reaction from fascist government because it's very thin. It's very shaky. And so in order to hold up the thinness and the shakiness, what comes out is a lot of nonsense as a justification or reasons for things. And so it continues to be a house of cards. That's my hopeful note, by the way. It's a house of cards.
I'm only getting darker from here.
Be warned. Yes, so just a couple more details on what we're going to be losing out on. The National Institute of Health helps fund 99% of drugs that end up FDA approved in the US. The National Science Foundation only has a $10 billion a year budget, but NSF-supported research has led to the rise of an IT sector that now contributes $2 trillion annually to the US gross domestic product. So again, it's just even if you were a hyper-capitalist nationalist, you should be super in favor of all of this stuff. But Trump supporters claim that private investment will fill the gap. Obviously, we all know how that goes. The article says, quote, private firms have incentive to pursue only those projects expected to improve their bottom line. Scientific breakthroughs often generate positive spillover effects beyond financial returns for their investors, benefiting others who apply or build upon new knowledge or bettering society as a whole. Business-driven cost-benefit analysis would not value such spillover from R&D investments, meaning that an innovation ecosystem composed entirely of for-profit actors would underinvest in scientific research relative to the socially optimal level. And I got to say, I love a good socially optimal level of investment. That's the sort of phrasing that I think really gets through to people. And coming from a progressive think tank, they're really speaking the language of the people, helping them understand the benefits of science.
I also just want to quickly call out, it was mentioned in this article that in the one big beautiful bill, which just has terrible effects at every turn, they capped the federal student loans for graduate programs at $200,000. And that is well below what it costs for most medical schools. And there's all sorts of hurdles in addition to that, like anybody who, if people need a co-signer, or if you have poor credit, like maybe you don't get loans at all. It's all like hurdle after hurdle after hurdle to getting help to be able to pay for the degree that would get you into this field. And of course, that is going to contribute to a lack of diversity, but it's just going to put it out of reach for many, many people. And so by doing that, you are devaluing the job in and of itself. I mean, look, higher education is ridiculously expensive. We all know this. It is not good that it is the way it is. Some medical schools, I think it was NYU who did it first, are saying we're going to make it free just to get more people into the program to be doctors. I mean, that should be the direction we're moving, let's be clear. And maybe, since we are trying to talk about silver linings, maybe some of the silver lining here is that maybe other universities might possibly, if they have the funds, do something like that, because they've realized that more and more people cannot attend their programs. So maybe there might be some sort of reaction to that. But it is another instance of, we don't even want people to be in this field, so we're going to throw up the barriers. We desperately need doctors. Like, we need PCPs. We need just like general practitioners, and we don't have enough. And people don't want to be in the field because post-COVID, it was just a nightmare, and things have been continuing to be a nightmare. Just to clarify, when I say post-COVID, I clarified this in a comment. I don't mean COVID's over. I just mean after COVID happened. And so we're sending a big message here with policy that says this isn't even a path you should consider.
And we already kind of have that because it is so expensive. So a lot of students going into the medical field might be more encouraged to go into the ones that pay better, which is why you see primary care not being, the top choice for a lot of medical students because they realize they have a lot of debt and we live in a capitalist nation that incentivizes that. So of course, primary care doesn't make as much as, plastic surgery or some of the other high-paying jobs. So we already have that, and now we're going to cap student loan access. Yeah, it's not good.
Yeah. We already have plenty of hurdles, and now it's just, let's put up even more roadblocks, shooting ourselves in the foot.
And we're also making sure that no foreigners will have those jobs.
Right.
That's the other major point in this article. Just talks about how obviously everything the Trump administration is doing is like a flashing sign that says, do not come here. And obviously, if you were from another country and you were looking for somewhere to use your talents, that would be a pretty good indicator that, hey, maybe I should apply for a European university instead of an American one. And so they do. And then they will end up spending their whole lives in some other country doing research, putting their talents to use, and that country and those medical systems or those companies will be the ones to benefit from those people's choice of where they decide to move.
And now there's an, anti-Americanism flag when you're trying to come here. So yeah, they're doing everything possible to block.
I do think that we need to connect this to what ICE is doing. I saw someone say this. Again, this is another thing I can't remember who to credit, but this is an ethnic cleansing campaign. This is the beginnings of what ethnic cleansing looks like. We are removing people who do not fit the preferred racial makeup, and we are preventing people from coming in. That's what's happening. We're in the middle of it.
Absolutely. It's not complicated. All of this brings us to sort of the flip side of the brain drain. And this is from The Guardian. They write, the American system is being destroyed. Academics on leaving U.S. for scientific asylum in France. So this is actually happening in many countries, but this article just focuses on France. And so countries are now competing for American scientists like never before because they recognize this as probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to poach intelligent people away from the United States in a way that they just wouldn't have been able to entice people before. And so France, very quickly set up a new program of scientific asylum. And the article says, quote, as reports began to emerge of funding freezes, cuts, and executive orders targeting institutions across the Atlantic, institutions across Europe sprang into action, announcing plans to lure US-based academics. Hundreds of applications came in from researchers tied to institutions such as Johns Hopkins University, NASA, Columbia, Yale, and Stanford. And then this was just like a very poignant section of the article that says, quote, "It was a glimpse of the historic moment the world was facing. More than 80 years ago, as France was under occupation and repression, America welcomed exiled researchers, offering them a helping hand and allowing them to keep science alive. And now, in a sad reversal of history, some American scientists have arrived in France in search of a space for freedom, thought, and research."
Yeah.
That's brutal.
I mean, this program was limited and they can only take so many people and whatnot. But I was thinking and reading some of the people who have applied talking about this program. And one of them said, well, I'm going to be paid a lot less. And I have 2 kids and husband, and he's looking for work. And, I have to figure all of that out. But I think this is still the best move. And I'm thinking, yeah, but you're also not going to have to pay for health insurance, and cost of living is lower. So it might all even out. But it's still a huge, just like with immigration and the immigration crisis we're facing, in the sense that people are feeling threatened all over the world and are fleeing, going some here, some elsewhere. The idea of leaving your country, no one wants to do that. No one wants to do that. There is a push here. It's not like, it just might be better in Europe. They feel that they cannot sustain themselves here, that what they do, what they've trained for, is not valued in any way. And so they have to go somewhere else. And it is heartbreaking, no matter, yes, they're at a different economic level. They're much more well off in this case, but it is heartbreaking no matter what. No one wants to feel that they need to flee their country, that they need to leave. And I feel for these people because they're uprooting their lives. They have families here still. They got kids, like all of that. The empathy goes all the way around. This is a very difficult thing.
And what you're describing is exactly the point that I made at the very beginning about the very human logistics of doing science. It requires, a place to live and a place to raise your family and all of those sorts of things. And so that's why this is such a strange situation. Like, for America to have a brain drain is just not something anyone had on their bingo card 10 years ago. You just wouldn't have imagined a scenario in which European countries with far smaller budgets would have the capacity to poach researchers from America, not just because of the amount they were going to pay, but the human logistics of, like, how are we going to convince them to move across the ocean away from their extended family, to uproot their nuclear family and, put their kids in school in a new country. That's a huge thing. But the fact that hundreds and hundreds of American scientists are applying for these programs is incredibly telling. And we've just started. I think that's what's important. I pulled this. It's basically a listicle. The New York Times did this and pulled together some numbers from different countries. And just keeping in mind that they just spun these up in the last few months. So imagine if, as these countries realize, like, holy shit, there are American scientists, like, ready for the plucking, they might adjust their budget priorities so that they can invest in American scientists and get them while they can. So France spun up 113 million for the program. Spain, 45 million euros. Catalonia, which is part of Spain but sort of separately pulled together 34 million. Denmark had this statement, says, "This is a direct invitation to American researchers. Talented people are losing their jobs or funding because politics is overshadowing science. We want you to know there is an alternative. In Denmark, we value science. We believe in facts." So, and yeah, they're trying to fast track 200 positions for researchers over the next 3 years. Sweden said, "To American academic scientists, we need you." Norway is offering 100 million kroner, which is about $9.6 million. Britain is pulling together, they want to spend 50 million pounds or $66 million to finance and relocate international scientists. Canada is going to spend 20 million American dollars. Portugal's tiny. They're spending $2 million to cover the salaries and relocation costs. Austria wants to pull together a program. Australia says urgent and unparalleled opportunity to attract the smartest minds leaving the United States. And then it also mentions that Ireland, Belgium, South Korea, and China have also talked about starting programs directed at researchers, scientists, and students in the United States. The sharks are circling. People want our scientists, and Amanda just said, we're pushing them out, and they're going into the enthusiastic open arms of other countries that will figure out how to make the money work if they can pull in these people who they know will create enormous benefits for them as individual countries in the long term. The selfish nature of nation states to want to better themselves is kicking into high gear right now. And the America First movement is pushing everyone out of the country who has the greatest capacity to increase our wealth and prosperity over the long term. It is as dumb as you can imagine a policy by any government, but particularly one that says that what they're doing is all purely for the interest of the country and that we don't give a shit about anyone else.
And, be sure that these other countries understand that there will be more pandemics in the future. We ended up being the ones that made the vaccine because of all the things we've been talking about today, our like extremely vast and deep scientific infrastructure and funding. But they want to make sure that while America denies science entirely, they have the means and ability to do that if they need to down the road. This is protectionism, self-protectionism for sure. And man, we are just going to be sitting ducks.
I was just thinking about how Amanda described, scientists having to, I'm going to say flee, because it does seem that dramatic, but making the case of immigration, I often use some of those same talking points of no one wants to leave their home, their family. And then I'm imagining like some of these countries feeling like, why should we invest this amount of money in entitled Americans who voted a fascist into office, and having to make that same argument of, well, no one wants to leave their country. Like, not all of them voted for him. I mean, those are
because they're coming to take our jobs.
Yeah,
they're
and like
they will. It's possible American scientists will now be seen as the immigrants coming to take their jobs. Yeah, that's possible.
I think that's an actual
Yeah,
real. I
yeah.
mean, we're saying it with a little tongue in cheek, but I do think that could
No,
be a case that now has to be made. And I don't think Americans would ever think that they were going to be in that position. I mean, we do have that entitled way of, thinking and existing, and not everyone, but I do think being put into a position, especially when you're like, I'm not into politics, like I'm just into science, like it's about the science, and like you very quickly found yourself in politics. Yeah, it's not good.
I mean, Werner von Braun did a pretty good job. We built like statues to that dude. He actually built the Nazi rockets. So if he can do that, I trust American scientists to be able to like fit in Geneva.
I mean, not to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but again, like the irony of bringing a bunch of German former Nazi scientists into America, and now we have a fascist government. I don't know. Maybe some countries might be a little wary of bringing Americans over because maybe that might bring some bad ideas to their country.
You think we might infect their blood?
I mean, it might be
Oh my God.
too pure to bring American diseased blood, I guess. Whatever.
Geez.
Oh man, this is not the most pleasant, happy episode, is it?
We don't really do pleasant and happy here.
You thought it was gonna be?
No, I knew it was gonna be dark, but there's not really like all the positives are way across the horizon.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I have been thinking lately. I'm more thinking, 40, 50 years ahead than I am next year. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that's a mistake. Maybe that doesn't put me in the right headspace to fight in the now as hard or something. But I think that because we know how this is going to go, yes, there should be massive resistance. Yes, there should be pushback at every turn. But because we kind of know how this is going to go, it's very hard to think that way. And so it's actually easier for me and gives me feelings of hope when I think further out. And like, how will we clean this up when we finally get the chance? How will we fix it, make it better?
Is this from
You
the
know?
shock doctrine? When these disasters happen, the people just reach the ideas that already exist. Naomi Klein, I think that's from the shock doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
What we need to be doing now is getting the ideas in place that when the inevitable fall of this nonsense, we'll call it nonsense going forward, happens, there are better ideas than, say, like, I don't know, the Patriot Act or whatever Peter Thiel's got going.
Well, I suppose that brings us to one of our last articles, getting toward solutions to the degree we're able to provide solutions. This from ucs.org, Science Caught in a Riptide, How Authoritarianism Sweeps Away Evidence-Based Policy. So I like this just because it's another natural force metaphor, like what I was saying about hurricanes and tornadoes. It says, that independence, science's independence, that independence is why authoritarian regimes invariably target science and scientists. Authoritarianism acts as a relentless riptide, pulling science beneath the surface of political control. Authoritarian regimes treat scientific evidence not as a tool calibrated by research, collaboration, and the free exchange of ideas, but as an obstacle to overcome. And so the same article provides this relatively straightforward solution. Quote, science is part of a healthy democracy, and attacks on science are a clear red flag that political actors are trying to stamp out threats to their power. One vital antidote is adherence to the principles of scientific integrity. Government agencies must actively maintain scientific advisory committees and support rigorous scientific collaborations, letting researchers follow the science wherever it leads, rather than dictating results from above, end quote. So, yeah, I mean, I can absolutely imagine that as being like one of several tentpole arguments the opposition party should be making about how they would run the government if they were in power. It's absurd that we need to make that argument, but people are super not happy about defunding science. Science is very popular, even with the weird propaganda about all science being woke or about, the gender of lizards or whatever. Like, people understand that scientific research is good and that we need lots of it, and that, people either remember personally or through osmosis the great age of American superiority was the space race, and it's all science-based stuff. The Make America Great Again vision harkens back to a time when we were scientifically dominant. So people like science, and it's absurd that one party has gone anti-science, but that absolutely gives an opening for Democrats to say, like, here's how we will implement science and scientific reasoning into policy and governing. It should absolutely be part of it. And, and then has the beneficial side effect of creating better governance.
When Jay does his intro at the beginning of the show, like, we try to tell you how to think so dumber people on the internet don't tell you how to think. This is why the show exists, because there are so many dumb people on the internet talking all the time that it has gotten a lot of people to not believe science. Like you said, the space race, going back to the space race being like one of the most, seminal moments in America's like dominance. The pinnacle of that is landing on the moon, and it is completely normalized now. It used to be a fringe conspiracy theory that we didn't land on the moon. That is the normal internet talking point. That is a regular thing. I guarantee if you go in your day-to-day life, you'll meet a few people who do not believe that we landed on the moon, that was all made up. And that has contributed to this ease of just dismissing science in general, because, well, if they made that up, what else did they make up? And since I don't understand it, it can't be real. And going down that path, not to do the trite thing and say that we're in idiocracy, but I don't know, kind of seems like that's
We're pretty close.
that's the path, because we have a party that does celebrate anti-intellectualism, that does celebrate only knowing what is comfortable, not stretching any further, not going any further. This is what this movement is. It's just taking us back. And science, it takes us forward. It changes the way we think about things. It adds information that didn't exist before, that maybe challenges existing ways of thinking. And that is the opposite of what conservatism in general, but especially the fascist extreme version of conservatism is. They don't want to be challenged. They want to just think they're the best right now, and that's it, and freeze it in amber forever. But if we don't have a better message to say that no, science is overall good, it is something that has made people's lives better, it has expanded our lifespans, it's made this conversation possible that doesn't exist without science. Like, we are 4 people in 4 different places, 3 different places, talking across the internet. That doesn't exist without science, and it didn't exist without NASA getting to the moon and starting satellites all over the globe. That's a real thing that happened, and we're arguing about that as if it's a thing even worth arguing about anymore.
So I feel like the internet culture now has really tapped into the Dunning-Kruger effect, especially in the health sphere, because I feel like people have just enough information to feel like they understand it. And then they can fall for really stupid talking points because they don't actually understand it. And when you have someone who knows what they're talking about, they can go point by point and explain it to you, and you can have an understanding. But internet culture moves on so quickly, and you can only put so much in a minute and a half clip, that people don't stick around for those answers. They also don't have the attention span that they used to listen or read, a 500-page book that really goes into the details. But I am going to have a hope note that turns then very dark. So my hope note is that I think, especially when it comes to science in relation to health, we have a lot of things in the sphere that are going to eventually wake up a lot of people. It is only going to be a certain amount of time before they can no longer prolong the effects of the Medicaid cuts and the Medicare cuts. Like, we are going to see a lot of rural hospitals close down. We're going to see people fighting to even find a primary care doctor, which is shocking because it's hard enough right now, but it's going to get worse. So I think this is an issue that people are going to get radicalized, if you will, around. Now, the unfortunate part is that while we've been dismantling all of this, we've also built up the police state. And while they're currently being deployed on, I wouldn't even say Democrats, because DC is also filled with people who have diverse opinions, but we'll say Democrats. Right now, they're using it in a way that their base still agrees with. But eventually, when their base starts being the ones that are fracturing, that start having these negative health outcomes, and actually start showing up to push back, the police state is just going to be used in order to quash any protests or things that are, going to hold the administration accountable in those ways. So I do think that this is an issue that people will start pushing back and wake up a little bit. I just don't think it's going to do us any good.
That was a fun ride, Erin.
Thank you.
It was very briefly hopeful, and then just boo.
I gave the disclaimer.
Yeah, you did.
A comet hitting the ground is probably really pretty. So, you're a beautiful comet, Erin.
Oh my God. I was just going to point to, jumping on what Deon was saying about they're not interested in the, what I would say, basically, they're not interested in the pursuit of knowledge for knowledge's sake. There's a disregard for actually doing the work to know something versus have a bunch of theories that are not really based in anything and pick the one that feels good to you. That's kind of where we are right now, right? And the internet helps drive that in a big way. And I don't know quite where the divergence happened in not not wanting to have an answer, like a real answer that you can defend. That seems appealing to me and to many people I personally know. But there are a lot of people who seem oddly, because it seems like a contradiction, comfortable in this ambiguous, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, I don't really know space, but then making life decisions based on that. I mean, that's where I get confused. But unless there is, and look, I'm going to wax a tiny bit poetic about the Obama years in the sense that that's when they started having STEM events at the White House and bringing kids in and doing science fairs and like really emphasizing knowledge and learning from the top, right? Like from our leadership in our government. And it was always there to some degree, but there was definitely a big push for that during the Obama years. And it felt nice to think that that is culturally something we're all on board with, that we want our children to learn new things, explore things, and find the answers that the last generations couldn't find. Like that felt nice. That felt like we are driving towards the future, which that should be what government is, driving towards the future, setting the scene now, supporting people now so that we can continue to improve and have a better outcome for people going forward. That's really what the project should be. And since the top right now is so anti all of that, not just not interested in it, it is actively against it. It's only because the presidency has become such a big fucking deal in the way our news media covers it. But because of the environment we're in, the fact that the people in charge who get the most airtime, who get talked about constantly in the media, are actively against it, calling the people involved like criminals or traitors or, the rest of it. Like that makes the culture not want to care about it. It just does. And like, I think what's been shocking to me is how easily we've slipped into that. I thought it would take longer, but I think we're pretty much there and helped along by the internet for sure.
So, on the idea of government being here to plan for the future, you know who really made a case for long termism in government? Someone had an idea for 1,000-year Reich. And speaking of cognitive dissonance, they go both ways on that too, because I just want to bring up this bit from this last article, getting back to the Nazis and the brain drain caused by Hitler. And Hitler says, our national policies will not be revoked or modified, even for scientists, if the dismissal of Jewish scientists means the annihilation of contemporary German science, then we shall do without science for a few years. And then the article points out that this echoed a similar 1933 statement Hitler made when Karl Bosch advised that the dismissal of Jewish scientists from Germany would set physics and chemistry back by 100 years. And the response was, then we'll work 100 years without physics and chemistry. Like, how are you expecting to build 1,000-year Reich without any science for 100 years of it? That cognitive dissonance, I mean, it's everywhere you look in fascism. Nothing they say fits together with their suggested ideas of what they would like to have happen. And that's kind of the point. Like, it honestly makes me wonder if, because like I tend to think that they believe a lot of their own bullshit, but that level of cognitive dissonance tends to a level of cognitive dissonance that would be hard to escape and be like, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be around in 1,000 years, so I don't give a fuck. That's kind of how I imagine they might really think. It's like, I'm going to do what I want right now for my own pleasure. Deon was pointing out, a lot of white supremacists think that their life is bad because people of the wrong color exist in their proximity. And so the extreme version of that is people like Hitler doing the Holocaust and breaking down their own country's ability to do science, which is foundational for society. And evidently he didn't actually give a shit. I mean, that's not the most surprising thing, but it's nice to have the black and white evidence for it.
More honest.
Right.
I mean, the line from that article that I had to reread a few times really just felt me. So in this article, they were quoting a 1938 pro-science manifesto, and in the manifesto, there was this line, "Silence fell as after the trial of Galileo, the great men went out into a threatened world." And, like, that's how we are. Like, the trial of Galileo, in this case, is the Trump administration just fucking everything up, and now the people who actually wanna know things and who care about science are under threat and wandering and trying to find out where they can be in the world as people who care about knowledge and understanding.
I think we need to go back to one of our best presidents who really did care about education, who had the courage to say, rarely is the question asked, is our children learning? George Bush. George Bush really cared
What
about
about that
kids
one?
learning and knowing things, and implemented the No Child Left Behind policy, which has been an
That's
abject
right.
failure in education that's made everything a little worse and has made the cognitive ability or the reasoning skills of a lot of people over the last 25 years to the point where someone can think that Donald Trump is smart. And I can't get behind that. I can't understand it. I'll never understand it. But I do think there's a whole generation of kids who have gone through a deteriorating public school system that has helped get us here. And where some of them are young adults that are making decisions now. And if we really do care about investing in the future, investing in education would be a great start to get this turned around.
Mhm.
Or take personal responsibility for your children's education and pay
Yeah.
for it.
Mm.
Another great idea. Amanda, you pointed out the line in that article that really resonated with you. This is the one that resonated with me. The exodus of top tier scientists from Nazi Germany and surrounding countries beginning in 1938 and 39 has become known as Hitler's gift because of the substantial benefits reaped by those countries where those exiled scientists eventually landed.
I read that too and thought, man, I don't think anything should be called that, even if it's a good thing for like that. That's a rebrand. We need a rebrand.
Yeah. I somehow don't disagree with the need for a rebrand, but I also like it because it's so straightforwardly
Yeah.
a fuck you to Hitler.
Mhm.
It's a backhanded satirical compliment. It's not even a compliment. It's
Mhm.
pointing out what an idiot he is.
He's full of nonsense, that guy.
Hitler was full of
Complete
nonsense.
nonsense.
Right. This is how we cope. This is what it is. This is
Well,
coping.
so I was trying to think of Jay's intro into this, and I'm like, I don't know if he knew the debauchery that you were going
Yeah.
to devolve into.
So to wrap up, this last article was mostly about a manifesto written about the, atrocity committed against science by Nazi Germany and scientists getting together to write a countervailing perspective. And so I just wanted to read a bit of it. It says, quote, "We firmly believe that in the present historical epoch, democracy alone can preserve intellectual freedom. Any attack upon freedom of thought in one sphere, even as non-political a sphere as theoretical physics, is in effect an attack on democracy itself. When men like James Frank, Albert Einstein, or Thomas Mann may no longer continue their work, whether the reason is race, creed, or belief, all mankind suffers the loss. They must be defended in their right to speak the truth as they understand it. If we American scientists wish to avoid a similar fate, if we wish to see the world continue to progress and prosper, we must bend our efforts to that end now." And then the article concludes with, quote, "As scientists, we have the obligation, stated so clearly in 1938, to educate the people against the acceptance of all false and unscientific doctrines which appear before them, including the doctrine that loyalty to a fascist government will ever trump a loyalty to the truth of reality, or for that matter, the inherent dignity of all humans living upon this earth." End quote.
I just realized we should have all done a read of Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan before this episode, because he saw all of this coming. and that was a long time ago. When did that book come out? The early 90s?
I recommend you watch K-pop Demon Hunters because it's delightful. After you listen,
Depending on what you're in the mood for.
Well, after you listen to this,
It's another angle. Yeah, I think I'm just going to keep going back to remembering the flexibility of humanity as a whole. Science may be damaged, people will suffer in the meantime, but we didn't do this to ourselves, but collectively we did this to ourselves, and it's a thing that humans do to themselves. We understand it from the big picture. We understand that humans self-harm, self-sacrifice through ignorance personified, through politicians looking to take advantage of that ignorance, people willing to cast votes without really understanding what they're voting for. It's frustrating, but not surprising. And as was pointed out, like, science in general worldwide will take less of a hit than it feels like it's going to. It feels like things are coming to a screeching halt, but there will be an outlet. Science will find an outlet because that's what humans do. So did we solve this one? Or maybe should we just say that we have a hypothesis for this one, but we should rigorously test for errors in logic in order to solidify our best possible theory about a solution by following the evidence wherever it leads, that sort of thing?
That sounds like an idea.
sounds sciencey.
All right, if you have any thoughts, ideas on how to help us through this unavoidably difficult and painful transition period to whatever comes next, in the next epoch of science, you can send us a message at 202-999-3991, send an email to j@bestoftheleft.com, or reach the show on Signal at bestoftheleft.01. Thanks for listening, and remember that this is all really happening, so continue to be decent, act like what you do and say matters, and do what matters most.